Thank you very much, Adele and Adrian. That was a bit of a marathon, wasn't it? Thank you. Just want to say hi to all who might be listening in, watching in on live stream. Sorry you can't be with us, but it's good that you're able to join us in this way. Okay, this really is going to have to be a race this morning. I used to be a runner, but not anymore, but let's have a go. Okay, just to remind you of where we were when we were last in Acts, and it was Acts 12:24 says, the word continued to spread and flourish. And that's where we want to take up the story from there. So the good news is advancing north and west out of Jerusalem and out of Israel. It's good news for us because what it means is it's getting ever nearer to Europe. What we're going to look at very briefly today is what becomes known as Paul's first missionary journey, or part of Paul's first missionary journey, which took place in about AD 48 to 49, some kind of thing around that time. So what we've got is a whistle-stop tour, but just remember what we're looking at now, even if you thought Adele and Adrian's was a bit of a long journey, this would have taken months, maybe even the best part of a year. So we're going to see if we can get through it in a few minutes. So just bear that in mind, okay? Okay. And it's a bit of a holiday jaunt, you know. We're going to look at some places where some of you have been on holiday, you've told me that. And some of you said how lovely it was. I haven't got any slides on that for you, but this is as good as it gets. But I reckon Paul, you know, on his tablet, I reckon he chiseled out some really decent photographs. Okay. Okay, so very, very briefly, we find ourselves back in Jerusalem. We're told that Paul and Barnabas have just been off on ministry, and now they're back. And then almost instantly, the next thing that we hear is they're somewhere else. Now, it wasn't done by TARDIS or anything weird. It just took a while. Okay, so we've heard that Jerusalem was in the story again, but we're immediately going to be going, I haven't got the thingy, up to Antioch. You can see where Antioch is? Yeah, it's a bit of a fuzzy, isn't it? Sort of top of the med, okay, trust me. Say yes, Paul. Thank you, that's good. So it's up there somewhere, okay? So suddenly, we're 300 miles due north of Jerusalem again, in what is now the southern eastern part of Turkey. And you hopefully will remember Antioch from chapter 11. Okay, and if you don't, I'll tell you a bit about it very briefly. Antioch was the city that Dr. Luke, who wrote Acts, was brought up in. That was his home city. And I thought about this. I'm quite happy to say this is pure conjecture. But I wonder if Luke, when he was writing about Antioch, his home city, he wasn't at least a bit chuffed, which is a Norfolk word, I think. He was dead chuffed at what he had to write about the church in the city that he'd been brought up in. And I just thought about this, you know, there were some great things that happened in Antioch, and if you were standing where I am, and I wouldn't advise it, it's not clever being 250 mil above contradiction. What was I just saying? But I wonder if we ought to be really proud in the right sense of the word of what God is doing in our town. Jan and I arrived here in the middle of 2017. And I don't like numbers because they tend to exaggerate. But I think if we were fortunate about that time, there may have been about 50 here. Now just look at you. No, you're beautiful, but there's an awful lot of you. I think we do well, maybe just to note. I mean, it might even be good, actually, sometimes to write down what God is doing. Don't worry, it does not become part of the Bible. Trust me. But some just to note what God does. And that would probably do our hearts good. If our hearts are in a sad place, we can recall what God has done and what God is doing amongst us as a people. And I trust that we want to see God do something in our area that is a bit like Paul's missionary journeys. You know, we're not going to have to go far. We might have a chance to go over the river, but that won't take as long as sailing, as Paul did. But, you know, there's something beautiful about what God is doing amongst us as a people. It really is, and I'm grateful to God for that. And I just trust that you might be as well. So I think Luke probably was quite chuffed. And I'm dead chuffed of what God has led Jan and I to be a part of. This is a big family, but that's a really good thing. I want to just encourage you to stay in family. When I say the word, some of you might cringe. If we had time, I'd tell you about my family. I don't think it comes any weirder than that. Four kids, 4 different fathers. Boy, that's good being part of the family of God. Wherever you've come from, it's good to be part of the family at Kingsgate. Just as it was great to be part of the church in Antioch way back then. And just to remind you of some of the things that Luke had already said about the church in his home city. He said lots of things, but he said in chapter 11, 3 things about them. He said they were a people who were willing to learn how to live the life for Jesus. They were willing to heed the warning of God ordained prophets, and they were willing to share what they had with those in trouble. Basically, the church in Antioch, I mean, maybe it could have been called the willing. I don't know. But I wonder if we would like to emanate some of that, whether we are willing to learn the ways to live for Jesus. I wonder if we're willing on occasions to heed warnings that we might hear. And I wonder if we're willing to share what we have with those in need. That was the church in Antioch. And so when we come to chapter 13, we read of certain leaders in the church of Antioch, and five are listed for us there. And boy, they're quite an eclectic mix, or they're quite a weird bunch, whichever you prefer. But the 5 that we're told about are Barnabas. We've heard of Barnabas before. Remember, he was known as son of encouragement, wasn't he? And commentators seem to think that this man, he was probably the most seasoned Christian amongst the 5, or he'd been Christian the longest. Okay, so there was Barnabas, there was a man called Simeon or Niger with a Jewish background, but Niger, when it's translated, means of dark complexion. Okay, so there was Simeon, there was Lucius, he was originally from North Africa also, and he was probably, we're told in chapter 11, that he was probably one of the founder members of the church in Antioch. Sometimes found members of things can become pretty awkward as things go on, as things develop, as things change. I don't sense that was going to be an issue here from what we read on. There was a guy called Manaen. Again, it's a Jewish-based name, but it means comforter. So they had an encourager and they had a comforter. That's not a bad church, is it? Be good to be encouragers and comforters like that. And this guy Manaen, he was a friend of someone high up. He was a friend of a ruler. See? He was sort of top-notch with all the high flyers. But he was a leader in the church, which is good. And of course there was Saul. I don't need to say much more about Saul because we've already looked at much about Saul and we will continue to do that. This really was quite a mix of leaders in the church. They were very different. And I think this was a very wholesome thing. You know, we live in a generation and an age where we're almost pressurized to do things that are politically correct. Yeah? That you need to do things PC. Okay? Well, I don't think we're going to find any of that as we go through the book of Acts. So it wasn't that these guys had been chosen because they were different in colour, skin. They had a different upbringing. One knew an awful lot. One was the senior Christian. It was. I don't believe it was anything to do with that. They were a PC church, but it was that they were portraying Christ, which is far more favourable in a family, isn't it? We don't have to do things because it sits well with the outside world. We don't want to be obnoxious. I mean, some of us, it's a gift of us, but just to Christ, you know, don't go down the route of being politically correct for the sake of it. I believe it would be to our detriment, actually. But portraying Christ, we can't go wrong as a family. You see, because in these bunch of leaders, they were so different. Let me give you sort of an example that might help. Okay, there is a couple in a family. I'm not going to tell you who they are, but one of them saw on the TV, the Palace of Westminster, which includes the Houses of Parliament. And this person said, I wonder how often the windows get cleaned. Not a bad question, is it really? And I'll tell you what, if our resident window cleaner, John, wants a job, he should apply for that one. That will keep you busy, John. Even the ground floor. I wonder how long it takes to clean all those windows. And the other person in the family is thinking, when are I going to bring this out as Lego? Or think of this. One of the people in this family sees the aftermath of England having played rugby. We don't talk about yesterday. But this person sees this England rugby player, and his shirt was not how it started out. It had been pristine white, and now it's a total mess. And this person says, how on earth do they get those shirts clean? And the other person in the family says, I wonder how I can justify spending their money to have one myself. You see, sometimes it's, sometimes we just need to have different outlooks because sometimes they can be beneficial to the family, okay? To have different perspectives. That doesn't mean we want leaders who are in opposition to each other. That would not help. But, sometimes just another pair of eyes or another pair of ears, an extra heart, an extra head can go a long way. And you may or may not know that Dan Darren have invited me on a weekly basis to join them on Wednesday morning because, they're of the opinion that an extra head can help. Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. But just sometimes an extra pair of eyes, extra pair of ears to hear things that maybe others don't hear, see things that other people don't see, but hopefully with the same heart. So this was a great church in Antioch. They were a right mix, but they were a great bunch. And let's just look. I'm going to cut this incredibly short. We're not even going to get as far as we should have done. Although I was given permission to preach longer, I want you to know that. I was told that my allowance didn't have to come out of the length of the reading, because that took more minutes than normal. But I just want us to observe from the very early verses of chapter 13. I had a question for myself. What happens when church leaders worship? Or what happens when churches worship? Well, that might seem a bit of a basic question. But one I felt I wanted to ask myself, what happens in worship? Well, apart from hopefully the obvious, which is that the one true God is acknowledged and bowed down to and acknowledged as the majestic and the Holy One, what we find in Acts 13 is, as this group were in prayer and in worship, they received direction and clarity for what they should do next. It's a good way to get your direction, isn't it? And your clarity in worship. I've been in some church meetings when I was a boy, and they were not very clarifying, if that's the right word. This is a good place to get our direction and to get our clarity in coming to worship Jesus together. And that's exactly what happened in the church in Antioch. As they were worshipping, God said, I want you to set apart 2 men, Barnabas and Saul, for the work I've got for them. And that came to them in worship. I love that. That's a good place to get it. It really is. Interesting verse in the Old Testament. I've often been intrigued by this verse. It's in 2 Chronicles. It talks about the people of God. And they were facing fierce opposition at this time. And 2 Chronicles 20 and verse 22 says of the people of God, as they began to sing and praise, the Lord set ambushes against the men of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, who were invading Judah, and they were defeated. That's how to face opposition, isn't it? In worship and in prayer and in fasting. We are told, aren't we, in the New Testament, we don't fight with weapons that everybody else fights with, because we're not in that kind of a battle. Church, I want to suggest to you that what we do together is a good way to fight. We fight in worship. We fight and wrestle in prayer. We fight and wrestle in fasting. We would do well to emanate the church in Antioch in the way that they faced whatever was coming way. And so when this had happened, it was time to set sail. Okay? We find in verse 4 that Saul and Barnabas were sent on their way via Seleucia to Cyprus. You know where Cyprus is? That's one of these lovely holiday destinations. But it's interesting, in the word it says they were sent on their way with the approval of the Holy Spirit. This is great stuff, isn't it? What could be better than moving when the Holy Spirit says you can go now. You can be on your way with what I have for you to do. Good stuff, really good stuff. And so they set sail for the holiday island of Cyprus. And we read in verse 5 that Barnabas and Saul preached the truth of the word. And we're introduced, or we find a second time, a young man called John, or John Mark. That was his name, John Mark. And we find that he was there sort of as an observer, as a helper. He's quite young. He's inexperienced. But isn't it great that these two men, the big encourager and the big leader, seek out this young man and say, come with us. Come with us. That's a good sign also, isn't it, of health when those in leadership are looking to encourage those that, I hate to use the word potential, because potential is what you have when you go and visit a house that's in a real mess and you think, I could buy this because it's got potential. But they saw in this young man, John Mark, something of the Spirit. And they said, come with us. You don't have to do anything much. We're not told what he did do. But these men were taking a younger guy with them. Said, come and see what it's like serving Jesus. Come and see what it's like to put your life on the line. Come and see what it's like. And so that's what's happened. And so I believe this young man, obviously, he must have wanted to do it, although I'm sure Saul was of a very persuasive nature. I still don't think he would have gone without wanting to go. And I just wonder if, this has been mentioned before. I wonder if this might be an opportunity in the life of a family at this time where some of us in the room might consider being part of ID, this intentional discipleship year. Mostly it's with young people, but I understand that this year there's somebody even over the age of 50 on it. So they take the ancients as well. But apparently this man is sort of seen as almost the granddad of the group. And I think that's beautiful as well. Serving alongside much younger people. Ever considered possibly doing ID? Or, it's been mentioned here, and some of our folk are going to be doing this. We've got Julie on it in a minute, who's involved in LEAD. Oh, who was that? Sorry, you okay? Yeah. Sorry, that was wind. Okay. But when Julie came up and spoke to her weeks back, this spot is still warm from where she told us all about it. But, this might be a good time in the life of the church to become equipped for what God is going to do. Because it will need it. It needed equipping in order for the gospel to travel around this region. Most of it, that big chunk Turkey, it was then known as Asia Minor. It was a huge area. And they were about to hear about Jesus for the first time. So I'm going to ask you, consider it. Consider if that might be something that you could be involved in order to become prepared for what Jesus wants to do through our Antioch. Okay? There's more after this, and you'd have already. I'm going to ask you to read it again in your own time. If there's a couple of you, read it the way Adele and Adrian read it. That was really clever. Although I did notice that Adele had all the really good bits. She had bits when God spoke. Adrian knows his place. That's good. But after this, they travel on to Pisidia, and then as far as Iconium, which is way, way up into Turkey. But what's happening is this. A blaze is being trailed through these men that will never be extinguished. Something of Jesus was getting in to these lands that are not known of Jesus through those inspired to go. That even though they would face opposition, challenges, hardships, persecution, death, nothing was going to stop the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. Fancy some of that? I hope we do, church. Let's go along for the journey together, because it takes all of us, even if some of our going means staying. Because in the church at Antioch, at least 3 of the big guns stayed behind. Sent 2, 3 stayed back to lead the church, inspire the church, and be eagerly waiting for news of what God was doing through the lives of others. Thank you.